good afternoon to you. Thank you so much for joining us. This is African News Network ANN7. We are coming to you from Madibeng Municipality, where the President for the Movement for Democratic Change team, Mr. Tsvangirai, joins us this afternoon. Mr. Tsvangirai, it's a pleasure to have you on ANN7. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah.
Let's get right into it. On Thursday, you held what has been dubbed as a massive protest in Zimbabwe. Talk to us about this protest and why it was such a huge success. I mean, we have seen in the past protests in Zimbabwe being disrupted by the riot police. Why was this protest such a success?
A number of significant developments took place before the march. As you know, the country is going through a very serious national crisis. Poverty levels, the 15 billion that has just disappeared, the repression, lack of constitutional observation, the rights of the people. So I think the timing coincided with the extent to which people's problems have manifested themselves in a big way. Initially, there was an attempt to try to block that march, but we insisted that we can't 4 days before our independence have to go to court to enforce what are our basic rights in terms of the Constitution. But this is what happened. We had to go to court to be allowed to do that march. But also, I think significantly was the organization on the ground that went into mobilizing the people. And people were ready. It was successful because people responded positively. The problem of Zimbabwe is illustrated by the extent to which the government, led by President Mugabe, is responding to this national crisis. They are too preoccupied with their succession battles, and yet people are starving. There's massive starvation in the country, massive poverty. And therefore, a combination of all these factors led to the mobilization around the sentiments of the people on the ground.
You speak of a lot of Zimbabweans suffering, Mr. Tsvangirai. We're in South Africa at this moment. There's millions of Zimbabweans who have come to this country to look for survival. Who are we to blame for this? Is it President Mugabe? And if it is, do you think if he actually leaves the presidency, things will change?
No, in fact, you must understand everything starts and ends with the leadership. It starts and ends with the vision. And so, President Mugabe, elected or not, even if there is a dispute, has the responsibility of defining and responding to the national crisis. We can't go and blame any other leader other than our own leaders. If President Mugabe should leave, it doesn't mean necessarily that the problem has gone away. It is because of the past 36 years, a governance culture has been perpetrated by President Mugabe and ZANU-PF. So unless you are able to tackle the cause of the problem, which is the governance culture, the leadership culture, then you are entrapped in this long view of perpetuating the same culture forever and ever. So people are saying enough is enough. We can't have a leadership which ignores the sentiments that we Zimbabweans have fought for and died for. Isn't it an irony of history that having fought to liberate ourselves, we find ourselves having to engage in another liberation struggle to liberate the people of Zimbabwe from their own leadership? So I'm just trying to emphasize that part of the values of liberation struggle has been to bestow freedom, economic opportunity, and prosperity to the people. Now, what have we seen? We have seen a total reversal of the very same objectives of the liberation struggle. And that's why we say it's not President Mugabe alone. I think it's the whole collective leadership of ZANU-PF that is answerable for the mess that the country has now obtained.
All right. There's a lot of Zimbabweans who have looked up to you for the change that you speak of, who might feel the same way that enough is enough. We need some kind of change. And there's some Zimbabweans who have a sentiment that you kind of you know, after the elections in 2013, they didn't feel that, you know, in terms of leadership, you were there for them. There has been talk of a lack of funding for the MDC coming from the West, which alluded to a lack of confidence in you being a leader. Is any of this true?
I don't get endorsement from the West or from any other part of the world, except the fact that if a struggle is owned by Zimbabweans, it is Zimbabweans who will fund that struggle. To the extent that they are able to commit themselves and be resilient, in itself is an indication of their continued commitment to that very same objective. So there could be skeptics who want instant coffee or instant change overnight. We have never defined a time frame for this struggle. Just like when we were fighting for our liberation, we never defined a time frame. A dictatorship does sometimes define its own conditions, and it evolves. And as far as we're concerned, we're always prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice to liberate ourselves, even against our own brothers. So that is the commitment. And skeptics may want to say, oh, you have not dislodged Mugabe, and therefore you have failed. I don't think that I, as a person, can be accountable for a lack of change in Zimbabwe. The conditions themselves determine how the people of Zimbabwe are going to tackle their own struggle. I must say that I'm humbled by the fact that people still believe in Morgan Tsvangirai as leader of the MDC. Of course, there is always a struggle fatigue. But from time to time, we find opportunities to exploit and to motivate Zimbabweans to say the struggle can still be achieved in our lifetime.
Let's talk about the infighting in the ruling ZANU-PF party that has been making headlines for the past couple of weeks and months now, I believe. And this could perhaps have caused a rift between the president and the war veterans. Could we see the country descending into a civil war? We saw what happened with...
Yes, I see there is disagreement. I see there is division and factionalism in ZANU-PF. But I don't foresee a civil war obtaining. Remember, we are fighting two transitions. We are fighting a generational transition as well as a political transition. A generational transition based on who led the liberation struggle, Robert Mugabe and his generation, and a political transition where 36 years down the line, there are new conditions where people are educated but unemployed, where the economic and social conditions has deteriorated under the watch of the same liberators. So it creates new conditions. So I don't foresee a situation where Zimbabwe will degenerate into a civil war. A civil war, the net effect of a failed state. I don't think that Zimbabwe has reached a failed state. I think that there are contradictions that are emerging out of the liberation struggle, the war vets, Mugabe, the young Turks, and all this. And it's all mixed up in a situation in which who is going to take over. No, it's not a question of who is going to take over. The fundamental issue is that who is going to lead this country to a better future.
But the question of taking over has been making headlines as well. It has
been a preoccupation of ZANU-PF leaders against the background of a national crisis that we all see. So they have diverted their attention from really tackling the issues because they cannot speak with one voice. The irreconcilable differences that manifests itself in ZANU-PF leadership actually degenerates into almost the race to the bottom. And yet the country demands that these issues must be handled. And that's why the people are angry that while these two are starving, you're busy fighting amongst yourselves. One would have said that what happens to ZANU-PF affects the country. Yes. That's why we need unity in ZANU-PF. Not because of anything, but because they have a national responsibility to deal with the crisis that we are facing. We are in opposition. Some people will say, why are you not exploiting this difference? And our answer is, when the opportunity comes, the MDC is as united. It is the only stable and a united force in the country at the moment.
And speaking of unity, Mr. Tsvangirai, have you, just as a Zimbabwean, never mind the politics, have you ever tried to reach out to President Robert Mugabe to try and solve the crisis in Zimbabwe?
Well, look at it this way. I spent 4.5 years with Robert Mugabe in a government of national unity.
Yes.
And I took every opportunity to draw the attention, first of all, to his advanced age, and secondly, to the crisis that when we come to the point of elections, we need to ensure that the election do not become a point of dispute, that we need to take this country forward, as we have done during the GNU. Unfortunately, he's too preoccupied about power. And he has already said he wants to die in office. So any advice I may proffer myself, I think will fall on deaf ears because it runs contrary to his own objectives. But he appreciates one thing, that the GNU was the most positive contribution to the people of Zimbabwe for the last 20 or 30 years.
Again, speaking of power, there has been talk that the First Lady, Grace Mugabe, is somehow ruling and running actually the ZANU-PF party from behind the scenes. How do you see this?
I don't have the full facts to confirm that Grace Mugabe is running ZANU-PF from behind. But you know, behind every man there is a woman. And I cannot dispute whatever rumors are circulating about her exercising her influence on the president. I think she's exploiting the healthy conditions of the president. But you see, ZANU-PF is not just Mugabe and his wife and his dynasty and his family. It's a whole liberation movement with roots and with very deep roots in that party. So whatever Grace may be thinking or whatever she may have as an ambition, I think it will be an uphill task for her to fulfill those ambitions, especially if this is the ambition of promoting her own dynasty.
2018 is around the corner. Independence Day is in a couple of days on the 18th of April. What is your hope? What are your aspirations for the people of Zimbabwe as we approach this very important date?
We are facing a multifaceted type of crisis. I hope President Mugabe will stand up and say, ladies and gentlemen, I've had enough. And it's time that I pass on the baton to somebody younger and energetic to take this country forward. Not necessarily me, but even within his own party. It will be a bigger statement of movement forward than to continue to be entrapped in his own thinking. For the people of Zimbabwe, this crisis is not good. This crisis is political. And for us to solve the economic problem, we need to find a political solution. And that political solution can only be obtained when people converge around what is the basis of a national crisis and how do we solve them. We have begun as MDC to begin to attract and to work with other political parties in the opposition. We need electoral reforms. Our basis for national dispute and illegitimacy arises out of an uneven electoral field. So we need to solve those electoral reforms. Secondly, we need to deal with the economic problems that we face. And to me, the crisis of the economy becomes a real fundamental issue. But you can't solve the economic problems until you solve the economic problems. So we need to come together across the political divide to at least give the Zimbabwe hope. And that hope can only arise out of stability, out of international confidence, and out of creating an economic vibrance that we had seen over the last 20 or 30 years ago.
All right, just before we wrap up our interview, Mr. Tsvangirai, there has been the issue, you spoke of electoral reforms. Yes. There has been the issue of a diaspora vote that will not be happening. We saw people demonstrating outside the Zimbabwean embassy here in South Africa saying, we need this. You cannot ignore the number of Zimbabweans that are in South Africa right now whose voice needs to be heard come 2018. What are your sentiments about this?
Our commitment, and in terms of the constitutional provisions, diaspora vote, people in the diaspora are allowed to vote. The question is not about the rights. The question is that, do we have the administrative mechanism for ZEC, the Zimbabwe Electoral Commission, to put up structures in the diaspora, whether it is in South Africa, UK, United States, Australia, for these people to vote? I mean, if Mozambique can do it, why can't we provide the same rights to our own people? I'm hoping that part of the demands for reforms includes the diaspora vote. But we know that those who are opposed to diaspora vote actually know that those who have gone by their foot outside the country may actually vote with their foot. So it is very important to underline the fact that the diaspora is just as desperate to exercise their vote like every Zimbabwean would like to have their vote and mandate observed.
Right. Mr. Tsvangirai, thank you so much for your time. And may I say that it's a coincidence that I'm wearing a red jacket today. I'm here as a journalist.
No, you are welcome. In fact, it's good to be aligned with the MDs. It's good. Red is good.
Thank you so much for
You're
your
welcome.
time.